What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And we are building on yesterday, where we touched on some of the latest news reports from training camp for the Detroit Lions in a live stream. We're building on that today, and then we also have some talking points. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to our video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we are back with more training camp talk. Now, these are mainly the notes from Dan Campbell this morning, so we have some injury updates. We'll touch on yesterday's, because yesterday we did this in a live stream format, which is a little bit different. We were live with Michael Banks. That was a great show. Shout out to everybody that was in there. Bring up those reports from yesterday, and then we'll carry those into today's new reports that we have in terms of the injury situation. Unfortunately, we're hit with some really bad news this morning, man. This is tough. Continue to get clarification on how serious certain injuries are, but for now, some of these can be a little bit just like, okay, we know he's hurt, we don't know exactly when he's going to be back. But I think we got some good news today, so let's start with that first. I want to start with good energy. We got some bad energy today, but I want to start with some good. All right, carrying over from yesterday, and yes, I'm going to carry this over from yesterday because we need all the positive news that we can get, and you've probably seen it by now, but Levi Onwuzurike is participating. He is practicing with the Detroit Lions. He is getting reps, and he sounds very joyful that he's out there. He said he's all smiles. He talked about how, you know, the D-line, the linebackers, the secondary, they're all vets now. He's excited to see what they do this season, and for him, he said basically having that injury in football is something that you're going to have to manage throughout your life, but he feels like, you know, if he does his preventative workouts, he does some abs, he'll be all right. So that is awesome news. I didn't expect this. This was one of those things that wasn't really like hyped up, like Levi could be back, Levi could be back. It just felt really quiet. So when we heard about this yesterday, that he was actually participating, I was kind of shocked, and I'll take it. Like, this is just amazing news, so I wanted to carry that over today. I don't have any new updates, but I just wanted to bring that up because we heard about it yesterday, and I thought it was fantastic. We have some new updates today, building on yesterday, and two of them are very positive. The first one, Marvin Jones Jr. So Marvin Jones Jr. was placed on the NFI list by the Lions, and we didn't really know exactly the reason for that or what necessarily he was going through. It was just hoping that it wasn't super serious. But you also understand, as Dan Campbell put it yesterday, this is the acclimation period, right? This is where you learn essentially the scheme. I mean, guys aren't hitting each other. You're trying to stay off the ground. So at this point in time, you know, veterans, if they're dealing with something minor, you don't need to rush them back. And that seems to be the case here with Marvin Jones Jr. The Dan Campbell, Marvin Jones Jr. is dealing with a minor back injury before he had got here, and they weren't going to start him. They didn't have the plan to start him at the beginning of training camp as well, so they had put him on the NFI list. However, he said that he's not worried about the situation. So again, this seems like really good news here for Marvin Jones Jr., understanding the vet that he is, and then also just kind of taking it slow. There's no reason to rush that guy back there, especially if it's something minor. Let him heal up. And then also you have good news with Emmanuel Moseley. This one I was really excited about because it felt like there was some concern about this potentially. Dan Campbell said he was progressing really well, but they kind of wanted to slam on the brakes a little bit. So, you know, you hear that and you're like, okay, that doesn't sound bad. Like, okay, if they're just slamming on the brakes, maybe they'll just push it out a little bit and get it back. But it does, he didn't say it was a setback, but it kind of feels like it's a setback based on how he said it. However, today, it sounds good, and that is that Emmanuel Moseley, and it kind of cut off towards the end, but that's who they were talking about. I had to, like, keep listening. I'm like, who in the world are they talking about here? Emmanuel Moseley, they are hoping will return by the end of the week. That's awesome. Okay, that is great. That's great news. I love to hear that. He was placed on the PUP list. We know that he's coming off his torn ACL. He's not there for the Lions, so that's kind of why he says it like that. He has an excused absence, they said, injury-related, but to be back by the end of the week, that would be fantastic. So it sounds like that's a pretty good update there with Emmanuel Moseley. I think he's in for a monster season for the Lions as long as he's out there and healthy. But obviously that's the key, coming off the injury that he had this past season in Week 5. And then finally, let's get to the bad news. Let's just knock it out, all right? We'll just knock it out, get in, get out. You know what I'm saying? Get in, get out right here. CJ Gardner-Johnson reportedly dealt with a non-contact injury today. Again, right, they're not trying to be on the ground. They're not wearing pads, right? They're not hitting like that. Non-contact injury. From what I've read, it sounds like a right knee type of issue. Apparently, he couldn't put much weight on that right leg, and he ended up actually getting carted off from Lions practice today. Apparently, a couple teammates went over there, and, you know, they were just kind of around him, comforting him, and he seemed to be upset about the situation. Understandably so. I'm upset about the situation. This was some horrible news. All right, hold up now. I'm just seeing this news. I was finishing the editing, and I got to throw it in there, okay? There may be some optimism here. I don't know if there's truth to this. It's very early, but it sounds like it may not be that serious and that he might be okay. again, like I said, we're very early in the sense that it's the end of July. Okay, we don't play to the beginning of September in terms of regular season. This guy doesn't need all the work. He is a vet in a sense. He's been in this type of defense. Man, I'm not gonna say I don't know. I don't know either way. But Bleacher Report also put out there that there was optimism according to NFL Network. So he might be okay. He might just be okay. Calm down. Back to the video. Keep in mind, like, I won't say exactly when, but I had planned to talk about Gardner-Johnson. We just did the video on this guy. I called him like a ball hawk, and maybe some of you guys watched that, and I appreciate it. I know they're long, but I appreciate that. But man, I was pumped, and I thought this guy was in line for a monster season. Of course, he's not under contract after this season, so I think he's playing for that long-term deal with the Lions, whether that's here or somewhere else. And I thought he was in line for a huge year with the Lions. So to hear this news it's kind of like heartbreaking, because this was just another ball hawk to that room. We even touched on it yesterday. I'm just hoping that it's not extremely serious where it's like, man, he's knocked out for the season. I really can't go any deeper than that because I don't know. I mean, the good thing is I guess it's about as early as it can get at this point. I mean, you're beyond spring now. It's about as early as it can get, but I don't have any information currently on how long this is going to be. First off, Tracy Walker getting back and healthy was already going to put into question where certain guys were going to play at, but if he wasn't there week 1 and Tracy Walker is able to come back and be healthy, I would anticipate that he's going to start likely alongside Kirby Joseph. I do like the depth that we have at safety, specifically with a guy like Iffy. When you look at the depth at safety, I really do like Iffy. I look at him as more of a strong safety, kind of that tight end piece. But in our defense, you kind of have to be multiple as a safety in the back end. You remember we lost CJ Moore, who wasn't just great for special teams, but also he was a really nice safety in terms of he kind of gave me more of a free safety feel, a little bit undersized, but very intelligent safety that you knew was just going to hold it down back there. And now I think there's a little bit more uncertainty. Of course, you have Savion Smith. Didn't really see him much last year. Very unfortunate injury against the Patriots. Just glad to see him back out there. You have the UDFA Brandon Joseph out of Notre Dame. So I think there's some questions about the backups. I like Brady Breeze. Maybe the Lions look to add a depth piece potentially here if it's super serious with CJ. Maybe a guy like Chase Lucas tries to make a slight transition, because it could come down to a roster positioning there. When we originally signed CJ, I just looked at him as a nickel, and that could have very well been his position, but I really do believe that his skill set fit really well at safety this past season. So that's why I keep an eye on that position group. And then you moved on to the slot cornerback position, which is also the role that C.J. Gardner-Johnson had played with the New Orleans Saints. Now it could very possibly be a guy like Brian Branch. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself here, but Brian Branch played the same role in college at Alabama. And if that's the case, I do want to see Brian Branch and see what he's about, but not necessarily this way. And then, of course, you also have a guy like Will Harris from this past season who played that role for the Lions. Highly intelligent players, but either way, I feel good about what we have at that position still. Hoping for the best year for CJ, hoping everything works out well and we're able to get him back on the field hopefully soon. But with that being said, that's the bad news from today. Now, a couple of final talking points I just want to touch on here from what Dan Campbell spoke on today. If you did not see this morning's presser, I just want to touch on a couple things. He was asked about Starling Thomas V, who was a UDFA free agent signing, a cornerback for the Lions out of UAB. And what he said about him is that what stood out to him in the spring was the movement skills, the fact that he was built the right way. Similarly, I think to a guy like C.J. Gardner-Johnson, if you look at a player like Starling Thomas, he's kind of a different build for corner. A lot of times you get more of the lanky guys. He's a little bit different in that sense where he's not super tall. He's much more of a stout build at the cornerback position, but he's also extremely explosive. I know we say that word a lot, but he's definitely that, and we know that he can move, he can run, okay? So we talked about him a little bit in one of our early UDFA videos, but he said there's also intrigue for him on special teams, and that would make a ton of sense considering his strengths. They definitely tie into being a successful special teamer. Keep in mind, you look at a season like last year, right? For example, punt coverage. We saw guys like Jerry Jacobs get reps there. If a guy like Starling Thomas V makes the team, that would definitely be the starting point you would expect for him on this Lions roster. And then also I've heard, he was getting some second team reps with a Will Harris. So this is a guy to keep an eye on. I would not be shocked whatsoever if he made the team as our final cornerback this year. I mean, this is a talented prospect. I think a lot of people thought was at some point going to get drafted. He didn't get drafted. Maybe he was one of the guys that Brad Holmes said, they picked up some players that they thought would go drafted, so this could be one of those players. And Campbell touched on the Justin Jackson re-signing by the Detroit Lions, and he said this is a good special teams player, as we touched on, 4th in the league in kick return yards on average this past season, which is fantastic. He said he's a reliable number 3 running back, and it got to the point where, every game that he was out there, he'd make 1 or 2 critical plays for us. And I know I bring up the Green Bay game, but there were some big plays where he would just find a way to pull through, and they weren't flashy, as I touched on in the video, but they were tough plays They were just like reliable plays. As Dan Campbell said, he was even a reliable receiving back. I touched on the video, I didn't think he was like an excellent pass catcher or an elite pass game threat, but he was a reliable pass catcher. That was something that you saw, and he doesn't really have a lot of fumbles in his history. Like, reliability is what comes to mind when you think of a Justin Jackson. And really the main thing that he touched on here was like, hey, we've had contact with him, and once all the dust settled, we look at it as we get him back into the building, and he'll be able to push and compete with the Jamar Jeffersons and the Craig Reynolds. Just add more competition, but he feels like at very least that's a number 3 type of back. That's going to be a fun competition. I think it's one of the best position battles. Craig Reynolds, Jamar Jefferson, Justin Jackson, and then also you saw the UDFA signings into there as well. Mohamed Ibrahim you have to throw in there. Now, Greg Bell was released by the Detroit Lions after the signing of Justin Jackson, which I think makes sense based on the play style. If you want to bring Justin Jackson back, that's understandable. And remember, last year he essentially replaced Greg Bell with the injury. Denzel Mims, and really the optimism for him here was that he's not a rookie, so you would hope that he has some of the basic route combinations and some of the basic concepts from that position. They will likely bring him in and just kind of stick him at one position before they ultimately try to start moving him around. I mean, that's going to be the key, I think, is finding a position that makes him comfortable, kind of easing him into things. I think there's maybe easier ways that you can get him the football than what I saw from what the Jets did, specifically last year, but these last couple of years. I think there's easier ways to get him the ball and kind of lean into his skill set. But with that being said, at the end of the day, especially if you're a depth receiver, it's just like Robert Saleh said, you got to be able to play multiple positions. It's kind of like an offensive lineman. The deeper you get in the depth chart, we really want to have that versatility there. And that may have been something that was a struggle for him with the Jets because of the time that he had missed for a multitude of different reasons. And when that's the case, and we're talking about even the offseason here, it could be difficult to have a really good understanding of being able to play multiple positions. And if that is the case, that could be the case here as well, where that's what the Lions are really going to be looking for. But I think it makes sense. Try to get him locked in at one position, do some things I think that he's comfortable with, and have him understanding one spot really well. And then if we can try to expand upon that, and that way he could play multiple spots. I think of a guy like Khalif Raymond immediately there. St. Brown, of course, the versatility he has, maybe not to that extent, and then he can have a good preseason. This could be a guy that does make the team for sure. And without Jameson, it's like what Dan Campbell touched on yesterday. Height, length, speed. You always talk about those guys coming out of the draft, and sometimes they'd even get drafted and they're just like extremely raw, where they're just big and fast. And sometimes they don't work out at all because it's like, oh, man, he wasn't a great route runner or a pass catcher. But Denzel Mims, former second-round pick, definitely had more skill than just height, weight, speed. However, as we know, it didn't necessarily work out with the Jets there. Also, we touched about the linebacker position a little bit. I thought this was really cool. He talked about Derek Barnes and the leaps that he's made in year 3. Really, overall, he basically said that he wouldn't be surprised with that room if Malcolm Rodriguez was starting week 1, because a lot of the talk is Alex and a guy like Jack Campbell would be the starters week 1, which is something that I kind of anticipate. But he was like, I wouldn't be shocked if Malcolm starts week 1. I wouldn't be shocked if Derek Barnes started week 1. Alex, like he kind of went on and on there that he really likes the competition of that room. Derek Barnes is taking these strides. They really like Alex Anzalone. We saw the deal they gave him. Jack Campbell being a first-round pick that he is. And then, of course, you're leaving out some of the depth pieces there, like the Jalen Reeves-Maybin, who he said, you put him out there on a 7-on-7, he has an interception. Like, he's just a guy that finds the ball. He gets the ball. He's also a pretty nice coverage backer and the special teams value. And the question was asked, which was a great question, by the way, if for whatever reason Malcolm did have a smaller role defensively because of a Jack Campbell, and it was Alex and Malcolm, or excuse me, Alex and a guy like Jack Campbell, which to me, it wouldn't necessarily mean that Malcolm won't play defensively. They'll still get him out there. But if that was the case and they wanted to utilize him a little bit more on special teams, maybe more across all units, because they did last year, we saw some of the key plays of the forced fumbles that he made. He said that, yeah, this guy Malcolm could really help us on special teams. And again, you talk about skill set for special teams. Like he said, he's like a heat-seeking missile. He is an excellent skill set. And the biggest thing for me there is reliability as a tackler, open field tackling, the guy's ability to close. That's where you get a lot of success, I think, for Malcolm Rodriguez. And of course, just the play strength. It's going to be hard to block that guy, all of those things that go into it. But I think it was really good to talk about the linebacker position. It got me hype. And the linebacker position really looks pretty darn strong, I think, on paper. And we'll see how that plays out. But credit to Brad. I think it really does look pretty strong on paper heading into this season from maybe years past where there were some more question marks. I feel like we have a pretty good sense of who a lot of these guys are. And then on top of that, you have the Derek Barnes, who ascended last year. He got better as a run defender. And Jack's, of course, a rookie, so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. Alex, I think, gets better because of the supporting cast linebacker-wise next to him, but also the front, the girth that the Lions have up there. So I think for a guy like Alex Anzalone, you're going to see, honestly, a better season. You have more of a sense of who he is, but you could see a better season this year just based on the situation that he's in. And then also we touched on Nate Sudfeld, who, again, we didn't get to see him last season. preseason, anything like that, because of when we picked him up. But as he said in the spring, he said he thought he did started doing some good things, and he feels comfortable with a guy like Nate Sudfeld. And he said this is how you want to feel with your backup is we can put him in there and it won't be too big for him, right? Now, they may not all be perfect, but it won't be too big for him if he had to step in for whatever reason. So they have some confidence in Sudfeld. I think we saw that, the fact that they brought him back. Now, maybe there was an offer to a guy like Bridgewater, but I think there's real confidence here. And again, I think if you're just basing it on what you've seen with San Francisco, I think it's understandable to have confidence. He had a really nice, really strong preseason for multiple games, and he played the Vikings, and he had a strong preseason. I think he also played the Packers, if I'm remembering correctly. And then finally, he hit on something which I just had to throw in here because I was like, man, what is he talking about? Apparently, with Sean Payton and also Bill Parcells, one thing that they did in the locker room, he talked about connecting with the players, is they would place mouth traps on the floor. He said like 2,000 of them, and then there'd be real cheese and fake cheese, and you had to get the real cheese. He said, don't fall for the cheese, or something like that. Wait, don't fall for the cheese? Don't drop the cheese? I don't think that's what it was. It wasn't don't drop the cheese. It was something about, hey, cheese is good. Y'all know those little like circle things where you put the cheese in them? Did they sell those like at every place? Yeah, you guys, like they're like tubes or cylinders, but they put like the diced cheese. That's a classic. That's a classic. Y'all know it. Don't lie to yourself. That's a classic. That kind of cheese. All right, we're going to move on. I don't know what I'm talking about. We're going to wrap it up here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hoping for the best for CJ Gardner-Johnson. Again, check me out. I'll be on Bleacher Report, 2 p.m. Eastern today. I appreciate to have you guys in there. See you guys in the chat. But until next time, thank you for watching, and I'm out.